In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint an iris flower in watercolor. If we haven't met before, my name is Michelle, and on this channel you'll find art tips and techniques, social media and business training for artists, so please do consider subscribing. If you click the little bell icon, you'll get notified every time I have a new video for you. So recently I was teaching a botanical painting course. Now it's early summer here in the UK, so we've got poppies and we've got irises, two of my favourite flowers. I love anything with a bit of drama and a bit of sort of sculptural quality. So I was wandering around in between chatting to my students and photographing the flowers, and I got a fantastic picture of an iris. So that's what I've been working on. I'm going to point my big camera downwards and take you through the stages. So here we are looking down at my drawing board, and you can see I've already put a background in this flower painting. Now I'm going to discuss the materials and the colours I'm using in a second, but first of all let me just explain about the background. Now you don't have to put a background in a flower painting. You can take a more botanical approach, and that's something I did when I painted some purple irises a few years ago. That was a very successful painting. The painting sold, and it's still one of the most popular ones on my website, and I sell, you know, a fair amount of prints of it too. So I don't think that you have to do a background like this. Now you can do if you want to, and I've done lots of videos that will explain how to do this. Now I'll put some of those up and the information cards at the top of the screen. If you're interested in the background, you can click on those cards as they come up. Don't worry, it won't take you off of this video. You'll just be able to see some other videos that I've made for you after this one. So let's look at the colours I'll be using for this painting first of all. So here's the original photograph, and I've actually used three colours so far. So I've used Talon's Rembrandt cadmium yellow light, that's this yellow here, so it's just sort of the next slightly warmer shade up from a lemon yellow, which would be rather greenish. I've used some SAA tropical phthalo blue to mix these lovely bright greens, and also I've kept some of it just on its own here, so you've got some sort of blue sky type colour. And I've also used permanent blue violet. Now I've got options here, so let me put some swatches of those colours out so you can see them. So here's your yellow, and here's the tropical phthalo blue, and last of all I've got the permanent blue violet. So this is a fabulous bright violet colour. Now you can see that there are actually two purples in here. So we've got this bright violet colour here, and we've also got this more sort of brownish, more aubergine purple. Now, although I've got other purples in my palette, for instance, I've got this one here, which is, I believe it's a Winsor & Newton Perylene Violet. So look at that beautiful sort of aubergine reddish purple. So that's a lovely colour. But the thing is, I want to stick to a limited colour palette insofar as possible, which all that means is just using as few colours as possible within this painting. Now the thing to understand about flowers is that they have their own colour palettes. So I know that if I mix this yellow with this purple, what I'll get is this colour here, because it's just where those colours overlap. I don't have to use a completely separate colour like this one. So let's try that. Let's mix some purple here into this yellow. And you can see that I start to get a more brownish colour there. Yeah. So I could use this one in any, you know, I could use this one. In some ways it's more beautiful, but I do like to stick to that limited palette, and then I know that I've got everything hanging together nicely. It just gives a certain look to a painting. So we're going to try and stick with just these three colours. Now those are the paints I'm using. I've also got some watercolour pencils here, and I'm going to use these to draw lines into my flowers. You can see how that works there. It's kind of pushing the pigment away because the paint's been on the paper for a few minutes, but that'll just come back naturally. So I've got a brown here. I may even go into probably, you know, possibly a madder colour like this one if I think it's got a bit more drama. There we are. I quite like that one actually. So let's get on with starting the painting itself. Now the first thing I'm going to do is clean up some of the pencil marks here. And I'm going to put this brighter, darker shade of purple in first. And the reason for that is that I want to sort of get that purple in while my palette is clean and sort of the water is not particularly polluted. So first thing I'm going to do is clean the pencil marks up, because these ones here where they're just showing, you know, where the fold of the flower tips over, for example, that's just too strong. I don't want it showing through the paint afterwards. The paint will will block the pencil in. So I'm just going to take out as much of that as I can. So that any of those sort of internal folds, just going to get rid of them very gently. Now, as you go along with the painting, you want to remove as much as possible of the pencil as soon as you can. Now, you should make sure that your paper is always dry, so don't be rubbing out if your paper's wet. But as soon as you, if you do a line around an edge like this, as soon as you paint up to the other edge, you no longer need that line anymore. So take it out so that you're not blocking in pencil underneath your paint. So I'm not going to make you watch every bit of this painting, because obviously that would be extremely boring. But I'm just going to show you each of the stages so that you can follow along. So I'm starting off with the purple here, and I'm applying it on dry paper. So keeping this whole petal as soft and wet as I can, and I'm going to, whilst keeping this edge up here wet, I'm going to pop a little bit of this pink here. This is quinacridone rose, or quinacridone pink, I think it's called, and I'm just going to add a bit of pink into that there, so that I get this blush of pink at the base and coming up. Again, I'm not letting this top edge dry out. It actually goes at the top here, it kind of goes a bit more bluish, so I think I will also go straight in with some of the blue. So that's the blue I've already used, and let's pop some in here. I'm keeping this outer edge very light because that's how it looks in the photograph. And I'm also just going to take a little bit more dark paint in places just so I can show the contours here. I'm going in with paint now that's almost dry, because I don't want a load of bleeding lines to happen. So I'm just going to take that paint in where I see it and make sure that it's not drippy wet paint, and in that way I should just get it to stay nicely where I put it with a soft edge. So just evening out in places where it looks like it was spreading a bit too much. And I don't want to work on it much longer, but what I can do now is go in with the watercolor pencil. So now looking at these lines here, and I'm going to start taking those in. I need to be fairly quick with those, and goodness, there's a lot of them. And they seem to sort of fan out as they get to the top here. Now, because the watercolor pencil is sort of is bone dry, I don't have to worry that anything bad is going to happen when I'm applying this. So all the time sort of trying to look carefully at how these little lines are actually formed, and some of them are really quite wiggly. They also follow the contours of the petal, so that's really important because it'll help to give that that sort of three-dimensional shape to things. So as you can see, I'm midway through painting the purple. I thought I'd just show you the next stage. So what I've done here is I'm doing these little bits where the leaf edge, where the petal edge rather, curls over. So I've put those in first. Now it's really important that those are dry before I paint the petals that are attached to them, and also that one is dry before I paint the other. So I don't want these petals bleeding into each other, because the only place where you get hard edges is between petals and where edges turn over like this. So I'm going to be very careful to put these little light bits in first and let those dry before I put the main purple petal in. Now meantime, I can come down here. This one isn't touching any of the other petals, so I'm going to be constantly moving around the painting and painting petals that aren't attached. So what I'm going to do is pop that in the center there. I'm using a small brush initially so I can go around this edge, but I'll probably in a second change to a bigger brush. Now, although I need to keep it all wet, and keep the paint that I apply wet. I want to be very careful that the paint I put on next isn't so drippy that it just runs right across this area of yellow, because then I have no control. So what I'm going to do now, swap to the bigger brush and get some of the violet going in there. I don't want to let this yellow edge dry in any way. Now, as I put the water on there, I got a little tiny flick, which is often when your paintbrush is very wet, you'll get tiny little flicks come up here, little tiny drop, and I'm just going to press that and get rid of that. Now you can see I've got all this bleeding going on here. That's because the purple paint is a bit too wet, so I'm just going to get my brush now, dry my brush and lift out some of the moisture there so that that purple doesn't continue to infringe right the way across. I think we want it a bit warmer as well, so I'm going to probably add a little bit of pink in. There we go, and we're starting to get that colour now, so I'm trying to sort of work around all parts of it at once. So keeping that edge completely wet. So I've got some of the violet, mixing in a little of the pink just to warm it up a bit, and then we're going to keep going. It's gone a bit too purple here as well, so I'm going to add a little bit more of that yellow in. Now with watercolour, you're not aiming for a perfect copy of what's in front of you. It's just not possible. It's not oil paint. You don't have, you can't work on this for 3/4 of an hour until you get the exact same look. If you were doing that, it would be a much more formal botanical approach than this. You'd have to be a lot more careful and put a lot more layers on. But I'm not looking for botanical accuracy. I'm just looking for an accurate representation of the type of flower it is, and to capture something of the beauty of that flower. So here we are. This is going fairly well, isn't it? Now, if there's any sort of lighter areas with my brush just damp, I can just lift out a bit of a highlight there. You want to be careful doing that. You have to do it fairly quickly. As soon as the paint starts to dry, you're a bit lost with that one, so we won't do any more of that. Now you can always put another layer on, so don't be panicking. If your paint's gone on too light, I don't think it has in this case, but if my paint has gone on too light, just let it dry and then put another layer over the whole thing. The last thing you want to do is fiddle with it when it's damp. I am not going to go back up here with a wet paintbrush, because I'll just put a load of ugly drying lines into my petal there. So that's all gone on okay, and now I want to get those little lines in. So I think for the sake of drama, we'll go for the reddish sort of madder colour, and you can see they start outside of the yellow, so I'm just going to start putting them in here. It's important to sort of really look at how they come down and how they spread out and the shapes they make, because they follow the shape of the flower. They follow the shape of the petal, and you can actually use them to make your picture look more three-dimensional. And it's drying rather rapidly because it's quite warm in the studio today, so I'm getting these put in as quickly as possible. So it's really a matter of observation. Often when painting flowers, it's a good idea to just spend some time, first of all, whether those are real flowers or whether they are from a photograph. It's really important that you understand the structure of the flower itself. If you don't understand how it works, then you've got no chance of making it look okay on the picture. So there we are, and I'm pretty happy with that. I might put a few more of these in, and this is starting to dry up here, so I'm going to go back in with those purples now. So what I've done now is I've placed these other little bits of yellow in here. So these are these pieces here, and I've painted this petal in here. So what I'm trying to do all the time is play off light against dark. Now the underneath petals are usually, not always, but usually lighter than the upper parts. So I'm going dark where I know I'm going to have light next to it. Again, this here is going to be quite light, so I want to be dark next to it, whereas over here I've gone a little bit lighter, so that as I put the dark of this petal in, that will show up against that. So it's a matter of playing lights against darks. Now Now that this petal here has dried, I'm fairly happy with it, but to be honest, you know, looking at this one here, it could do with more drama, and I'll get that by putting some more sort of this this reddish colour around here, which I'm going to get by mixing pink and the violet. So what I'm going to do is put another layer of colour on here. So how I'm going to do this is by re-wetting the petal with completely clean water, because I don't want to just put dark paint around here. I'll get a nasty drying line. So what I'm going to do is I'll get some paint mixed up ready first. So I'm mixing the violet and the pink. So I've got a really strong mix of that, and I'll probably go in with some paint that's straight from the pan as well. And I'm going to wet the whole petal now with completely clean water. Now it's really important that you're clean with your water, and that when you're doing something like this you do wet cleanly. Now I don't want to lose any of this yellow, which I might get if some of this pigment bled across here. So what I'm going to do is start wetting it this way down. So here we go, I'm going to put clean water on, starting with that yellow that I want to preserve. Now because yellow is quite chalky and opaque, it's a cadmium, so I've probably picked up a little bit of that yellow on my paintbrush. I don't want to spread that right across the petal either, so I'm just going to put some clean water there on my paintbrush, rinse that yellow off and keep spreading across. Now even though I'm not going to be painting down this part here, I am still going to put water on it, and the reason for that is that sometimes you get a drying line even just with clean water. The other thing this is going to do is just soften those watercolour pencil marks, because the paper was a little bit dry when I put those on. So by going across here with clean water, we're going to soften those in a little bit too. So once I've applied that clean water, I'm then going to put that little bit of darker paint. I don't want it all over this petal. I'm just going to put it around the yellow here so that I show it up. So I'm going to go now into a smaller paintbrush and picking up paint almost directly from the pan so that it's nice and thick. Now the reason I want the paint to be thick is because I want it to stay pretty much where I put it. If I go on here with drippy paint, it's not going to stay where I put it. Okay, so let's just get a bit of shape to that. Just going to clean my paintbrush now and just use a sort of a semi-damp paintbrush just to blend that out a little bit so that it's not too sort of incongruous and doesn't look really uncomfortable. That's not bad. I'm actually going to go in a little bit more just of the pink around the edge there. Again, clean my paintbrush. I don't want it bleeding into the yellow too much, so I'm just going to take out some of the water there with a damp paintbrush. A damp paintbrush will always pick up water from your paper like a little vacuum cleaner. Again, not going to work on it too long, but I've added the drama to that petal, and now I'm going to let it dry. So up here you can see there's actually a tiny raindrop in there. So I've put a little bit of paint on there and put some clean water in the middle of it. I put a lot of clean water in the middle of it. What happens if you put too much water on an area, almost so that the surface tension is pushing the water up, what it'll do is it'll push the pigment out to the edges, so you get this kind of little outline going on. So hopefully later on, once I put some paint around that, that will start then looking like a little raindrop sat on the petal there. I mean, it's not very clear in the original picture, so it doesn't matter too much, but it's just a nice touch. Now, if you look at this petal here, I started fairly dark up here, but then as I came down to this edge, I lightened up. And the reason for that is I want the underneath petal to be darker. You always want to put darks and shadows in areas that are under other areas, behind, or in the middle of things. So whenever something goes in, your brain is trained to know that when areas are dark, they recede. So whenever something goes in, it'll make it look darker. So that's why I purposely went light towards the edge of this petal, so that when I put dark in underneath, it'll be a nice big contrast. So again, I'm cleaning up with my rubber first, because look at all these scruffy pencil lines around here. I don't need them at all anymore. I can see where the edge of the petal is because I've put the outside line in. If you're working just on white paper, you don't have a background, you want to just still take your rubber across and just minimize that line so it's just as dark as you absolutely need to be able to see where to put the paint. And now I'm just going to go straight in, just mixing colours on the paper. So I'm going to go in quite dark here and then just mix some of that yellow straight in so that I get this kind of mixed colour. So I tend not to pre-mix too much on the palette because you get rather sort of dead colours if you do that. So it's often much nicer just to let these things happen on the paper. It's going a little bit orange, so I'm just going to get a little bit of blue in there. So I'm just going between the colours that I've already used all the time. And see how that's gone bright blue, but it really doesn't matter. We're just going to keep mixing and keep blending until I get the required colours. Now if something goes a bit too green, a little bit of purple or red or pink will always kill it down. And I want to get some much lighter, fresher paint towards this outside edge. So just going in there with clean water and a little bit of this light purplish colour that I've mixed here. We're still sort of differentiating it from the very strong blue purples. So we've got this more kind of brownish purple here. Just going to tidy up that edge there. Take it round cleanly, and you can see that I'm keeping the whole petal wet while I work. So I'm keeping that leading edge wet. I'm not going to go back in up here with damp wet paint and mess around with it because I'll get drying lines. But there are just some very subtle little little petal veins here, and so I'm going to take those in too. Again, being very careful to see how they look in the picture and what shape that they take, because that's helping. Do you see how it's helping to make everything look three-dimensional? So I'm right at the end of my flower painting now, so I'm just cleaning up this last petal. Now as I showed you in the video where I showed you how to do this background technique, I accidentally painted across the petal here with some green. Now I've done my sort of scrubbing out technique. I've got other videos on that, and I've managed to lift most of it. There's a tiny bit left, but you know what, it's not going to show. So it's really important that you just live with your mistakes and that you don't let perfection be the enemy of good, as they say. The other thing I noticed whilst I was painting these other petals is that this bit of green here, I totally failed to put it in, so it was still white, and I was kind of thinking, what's going on with those petals? So I've just put that green in too. I probably will put some additional sort of stronger leaves in the background. I'm not going to do much to it, but it is just floating a bit at the moment, in that it doesn't really look kind of grounded in the painting. So the background's lovely, don't want to cover too much of it up, but I'm going to put one or two stronger leaves in. Now if you want to at some point see the actual completely finished painting, you can always join my Facebook group. It's got the same name as this YouTube channel, so it's In the Studio with Michele Weber. So you can pop over there and you'll be able to see all my paintings as I put them up. So I'm just putting a bit of clean water on here. I've changed my water again because I've been working with all these yellows, and as I say, when I'm back to this pure purple leaf, I want that real strength of colour. It's a little bit strong there, so I'm going to just add more water to it. And we've also got some pink going on in here as well. So I need to play off against these things that are around. So where I've got light edges, I'm going to go dark, and when I've got dark edges, I'm going to go light. So I think what we'll do is we'll spread that purple colour up first, and then we'll drop some pink in. Just taking that up around there. And another thing that I tend to do towards the end of a painting is I'll look again at the background, and if there's any areas where the petals are not showing up that well, either because the the background isn't light enough or it isn't dark enough, I'll add to the background and I'll just sort of wet certain areas and drop a bit more colour in, or lift a bit of colour out, because all the time, especially with flower painting, you're looking for drama and you're looking for those colour contrasts. Now I actually think there might even be the tiniest bit of yellow down the bottom here, so I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow on my other paintbrush. So that's something you always want to have more than one paintbrush handy, because you might not want to just mess up the one you're using with a different colour. So there we are, I'm going in there. I'm going to be very careful here because it's starting to dry up here. Even if I don't have time to do anything with it, I'm just going to put some clean water on it so that it doesn't get a chance to dry out. Whenever something dries, you're going to get a drying line, so we're trying to avoid that with this painting. It's always better, if you're having trouble and something's drying quickly, it's always better to get paint all over that area, let it dry and then put another layer on top. Far better than continuing to fiddle with it. So as I come up here, what I'm going to do is get some of that pink in. So I'm going in with pink straight from my palette. I haven't put any water, any extra water on my brush, because all that will do is cause a big old background. So I want that pink just to stay where I put it. So the pink has to be either the same amount of wetness as the background or a little bit drier. If it went on wet, you'd get a huge bleeding mark. Those little bleeding marks, they can look good sometimes, particularly on things like lily petals, but you've got to be able to control them. So I've still got probably a bit too much pink on my brush there, so once I've got this edge wet, I'm going to rinse that off and go back to the purple. Okay, so I want a little bit more dark in that, so going straight in with a tiny bit more the dark purple, being really careful here. I can't work on this too long, but I want this last petal to be really quite dramatic. Just spread that out a little bit. I don't want that to be a real hard edge. Where I'm spreading here, I'm keeping my brush fairly dry. So, because if I was to introduce a load of clean water on there, again, I'll just get a drying line. And the last thing that's left to do is to get some more of these fine lines in. You can see around here, I just put a little bit more dark around there because it's always good to get that contrast and that drama going on. And hopefully I'm starting to achieve that here. So do let me know in the comments if you like painting flowers and what your favourite sort of flower is to paint. Now, if you have trouble getting that sort of nice, clean, botanical look, you make a lot of mistakes, you think they can't be corrected, well, I've got a fantastic video for you that's going to show you how to correct lots of watercolour mistakes even after the paint is dry. You can watch that video now, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.